Somewhere over New Guinea in 1943, the sky looked like bruised steel. It was not the Klein blue sky of recruitment posters. It was not the shining, heroic sky that boys imagined when they first dreamed of flying. It was heavy with heat, rain, smoke, and the low gray weight of the tropics. Clouds rose like mountains over the jungle. Storms could appear in minutes. The sea below could vanish under mist. The mountains could hide entire valleys until an aircraft was almost inside them. Below that sky was a world that tried to kill men even before the enemy found them. New Guinea was jungle, swamp, mud, fever, insects, and rot. Airstrips were cut from kunai grass and carved into the earth by exhausted engineers. Steel matting sank into mud. Tents flooded. Supplies arrived late, if they arrived at all. Mechanics worked on aircraft with bare hands and heat so thick it felt like breathing through wet cloth. Leather rotted, metal corroded, tools disappeared into mud, tires split, engines choked on dust, rain, and bad fuel. Men fought the Japanese there, but they also fought the place itself. Malaria came for them at night. Dysentery emptied them out. Scrub typhus, dengue, jungle rot, and infection waited in every mosquito bite, every cut, every boot blister. A man could survive a mission against enemy fighters and still be taken down by a fever before sunrise. Ground crews sweated through their clothes before breakfast. Pilots sat under tarps, listening to briefings while rain hammered the canvas above them, knowing that if the weather closed in after takeoff, the jungle might be more dangerous than the enemy. And above that green nightmare, the air war continued. The Japanese still had veteran pilots in the theater. They had men who had learned combat over China, the Philippines, and the early island campaigns, men who understood patience, formation, ambush, and fear. They had aircraft American pilots had been taught to respect, especially the Mitsubishi A6M0. The Zero was not invincible. By 1943, American pilots knew its weaknesses better than they had in the early days of the war. It was lightly built. It could not absorb damage the way heavier American fighters could. It was vulnerable if attacked with speed and discipline. But in a turning fight, it was still terrifying. It could turn inside almost anything. It could seem to hang in the air, reverse direction, and slide behind a careless opponent before the American pilot understood what had happened. To fight on its own terms was to step into a trap. So the rule was repeated again and again. Do not dogfight a Zero. Do not turn with it. Do not slow down for it. Use altitude. Use speed. Dive from above, fire in one pass, then climb away before the Japanese pilot could make the fight his own. Hit hard, then escape. Boom and zoom. That was the doctrine. That was the math. That was how many American pilots stayed alive. And most of the men who followed the rule came home. Most, not all. Because war rarely follows rules for long. Weather breaks formations. Radios fail. Bombers drift. Escorts get separated. A pilot looks away for 1 second, and the fight is no longer where it was supposed to be. Manuals assume distance, timing, and control. Combat gives a man confusion, fear, and seconds. Somewhere in that sky, a P-38 Lightning was closing in. It was a strange aircraft to anyone seeing it for the first time. 2 engines, 2 tail booms, a central cockpit pod. It looked almost like 2 aircraft joined together by a single pilot seat and a set of guns. But the men who flew it knew what it could do. It had speed, it had range, it had power. It could fly long missions over water and jungle where single-engine fighters might not return. It could absorb damage that would tear lighter aircraft apart. And it carried its guns in the nose. 4.50 caliber machine guns and 1 20-millimeter cannon, all firing forward from the center line. Unlike wing guns, they did not have to be harmonized to meet at one chosen distance. The P-38 did not spray from both wings and hoped the streams crossed where the enemy happened to be. Its fire went straight ahead, tight and brutal, in the hands of a careful marksman that made the lightning dangerous. In the hands of Richard Ira Bong, it became something else. Bong was not the kind of man people expected to become a legend. He was quiet, he was shy, he did not carry himself like a warrior carved from stone. He did not make speeches in the mess tent. He did not boast about the men he shot down. In photographs, he often looked younger than he was, tired, narrow-faced, a little uncomfortable with the camera. He had grown up on a farm outside Poplar, Wisconsin, the oldest of 9 children. His father, Carl Bong, was a Swedish immigrant. His mother, Dora, helped hold together the hard life of a northern farm family. There was nothing glamorous about that childhood. It was work, weather, machines, chores, and long winters that tested both men and equipment. On that farm, Dick Bong learned something that no combat manual could teach him. Machines have limits. They also have moods. A tractor that ran clean yesterday might cough and fight you today. An old truck might start only if you knew exactly how much throttle to give it. A piece of equipment might sound fine to one man and wrong to another. Farm boys learned to hear things in engines. They learned to feel vibration through their hands. They learned when a machine was willing and when it was warning them. You did not simply force a machine to obey. You listened to it. You coaxed it. You pushed it to the edge, then stopped just before it broke. That instinct would follow Bong into the sky. As a boy, he watched airplanes passing over the Wisconsin countryside. Mail planes sometimes crossed near the family farm, and every time they did, Dick looked up. He wanted to be there. Not because he wanted fame, not because he imagined medals. He simply wanted the machine, the sky, and the feeling of flight. In 1938, he entered Superior State Teachers College. Around that time, he joined the Civilian Pilot Training Program, one of the programs that gave young Americans a path into aviation before the war. He was 18, quiet, and determined. The first time flying took hold of him. It felt less like discovery than recognition. He had found something that made sense. By 1941, he had earned his private pilot's license. That May, with war already consuming Europe and Asia, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Flight training took him far from Wisconsin. He trained in California and Arizona, including at Rankin Aeronautical Academy, Gardner Field, and Luke Field. At Luke, one of his instructors was Barry Goldwater, a man who would later become a senator and presidential candidate. But at the time, he was simply one more instructor trying to shape young men into military pilots. Bong did not immediately stand out as some obvious miracle. He was good. He had reflexes. He understood aircraft. He learned quickly, but his gunnery was not legendary. His instructors did not write that they had found the future ace of aces. He was a capable young pilot, not yet a national figure. On January 19, 1942, 6 weeks after Pearl Harbor, Richard Bong received his wings. He was 21 years old. He had never seen combat, and before he became known for destroying enemy aircraft, he nearly became known for throwing his career away. In June 1942, while stationed at Hamilton Field, California, Bong was flying the P-38 Lightning. He was still new to the aircraft, still learning its feel, still discovering what this strange twin-boomed machine could tolerate. Then he did what young pilots sometimes did when talent outran judgment. He flew low, too low. He buzzed the home of a friend who had just been married. He flew around the San Francisco Bay Area in ways that alarmed civilians and angered superiors. Stories from the incident would grow with the years. Low passes, a flight near the Golden Gate Bridge, complaints from people on the ground, even laundry blown from a woman's clothesline. Whether every detail was repeated perfectly or polished by legend, the heart of the event was clear. Lieutenant Richard Bong had been reckless. General George C. Kenney did not tolerate reckless pilots. Kenney was not a man given to softness when discipline was involved. He understood aircraft, men, and war. He knew that a pilot who treated regulations as a joke might kill himself, kill civilians, or kill the men flying with him. He reprimanded Bong and grounded him. In another command, under another general, that could have been the end of the young pilot's promise. But Kenney saw something else. Bong had been foolish, yes, but he had also been testing the aircraft, feeling it, learning the edge of it. There was a difference between a pure showboat and a pilot who was trying, however stupidly, to understand what his machine could do. Kenney did not forget that. Months later, when he went to the Pacific to command the 5th Air Force, he wanted aggressive pilots, not careless men, not fools, but pilots who could take a machine to its limit when the moment demanded it. Pilots who would not freeze when the sky came apart. Pilots who understood that war did not always reward the man who followed the book perfectly. Richard Bong's name went west. The young lieutenant who had nearly been ruined by flying too low over California was sent to a theater where flying low, fast, close, and hard could mean survival. He arrived in the Pacific in late 1942 and joined the 49th Fighter Group. They were known as the Flying Knights. At first, Bong flew with the 39th Fighter Squadron under Captain Thomas Lynch, an experienced pilot who had already seen enough combat to understand what new arrivals did not. Veterans watched rookies carefully. They watched how they listened in briefing. They watched how they walked to their aircraft. They watched whether their hands shook. They watched whether they talked too much. They watched because in combat, a new pilot was a question mark with wings. Some men learned quickly. Some men never got the chance. On December 27, 1942, over Buna, New Guinea, Richard Bong answered the first question. He met the enemy in combat and shot down 2 Japanese aircraft, a Zero and an Oscar. Just like that, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin had his first victories. He returned alive. He received the Silver Star. His fellow pilots congratulated him. A new combat pilot had survived his first real test and done more than survive. But when they asked him how he had done it, Bong did not give them a speech. He did not claim brilliance. He did not explain some beautiful aerial maneuver. He said, in his own plain way, that he had gotten close before he fired. He did not think of himself as a great shot. He did not trust long-range gunnery. He had waited until the enemy was near enough that he could make the hit count. At first, some men probably thought he was being modest. They would learn that he was not. He was describing the method that would carry him through the war. On January 7 and January 8, 1943, Bong scored again. In roughly 2 weeks of combat, he reached 5 confirmed victories. He was an ace. He was 22. That alone would have been enough to make other pilots notice. But it was not only the number of victories that mattered. It was how he got them. Bong did not like waste. He did not open fire from far away simply because the target was visible. He held his fire. He waited. He closed in until the enemy filled the gun sight and the P-38's nose guns could do their work. At the distances he preferred, hesitation was deadly. But so was missing. He chose the danger he understood. For other pilots, this looked almost insane. Every second spent closing the distance gave the enemy more time to see him, more time to react, more time to fire back. A slight mistake could put him in a collision. A burst from a Japanese fighter at close range could rip through his aircraft before he could escape. The closer he came, the smaller the margin became. But that was the bargain. At longer range, Bong might miss. At close range, the P-38 rarely forgave the target, so he got close. Again and again. By spring 1943, Bong's reputation was spreading through the 5th Air Force. He was still quiet on the ground, still modest, still not the kind of man who naturally attracted attention in a crowded room. But in the air, men began to understand what they were seeing. He was not beating the zero by fighting like a zero. He was not trying to outturn it. He was using the P-38 as the P-38 was meant to be used, but with one terrifying adjustment. He shortened the distance until the strike became almost unavoidable. It was discipline mixed with nerve. It was bad gunnery turned into close-range certainty. It was a farm boy's trust in a machine pushed to the edge, and it worked. Through 1943, the air war over New Guinea grew fiercer. The Japanese still had aircraft in the region, still had veteran pilots, still had the ability to punish mistakes. American pilots flew escort missions, fighter sweeps, and attacks through weather that could scatter formations before the enemy appeared. Every mission was a negotiation with fuel, clouds, mountains, engine trouble, and enemy fire. Bong kept flying. His victory count rose. 6, 8, 10, 12. The numbers mattered, but they did not show the full cost. Every victory meant a fight close enough to be killed in. Every mission meant another chance for luck to run out. Every landing was a small resurrection. Then came July 26, 1943, Markham Valley, near Leh. Bong led a flight of P-38s on a fighter sweep. They were looking for Japanese aircraft and found them. The fight that followed became one of the defining moments of Bong's career. He was credited with 4 enemy aircraft destroyed in a single day. His flight claimed 11 Japanese aircraft in total. Not one American plane was lost. On paper, it was a brilliant victory. On the runway, it looked like a warning from God. Bong's P-38 came back badly damaged. Ground crews found dozens of bullet holes in the aircraft. The tail had been hit. Control surfaces were torn. Fuel tanks were punctured. Hydraulic systems and other parts had suffered. The lightning had absorbed the punishment that might have killed its pilot. The aircraft had done its job. It had brought him home, but it had also shown everyone the price of his method. Bong had flown close enough that Japanese guns could reach him, close enough that the enemy did not merely see him as a speck in the sky, close enough that his P-38 came back, marked all over, with the evidence of how thin the line had been. For that mission, he received the Distinguished Service Cross. By August 1943, he was promoted to captain. He had 16 confirmed victories. He was 23 years old. General Kenny knew what that meant. Bong was becoming famous, and fame in combat could be a curse. The public wanted heroes. The press wanted stories. Other pilots looked to him, but this guy did not care how many medals a man had. A lucky bullet could still find him. A fuel leak could still burn him. A bad engine could still send him into the jungle. Kenny had seen enough war to know that luck had a limit, so he sent Bong home on leave. Back in Wisconsin, Dick Bong returned as a hero, although he never seemed entirely comfortable being treated as one. He was still the farm boy from Poplar, still quiet, still more at ease around aircraft than microphones. At Superior State Teachers College, during a homecoming event, he met Marjorie Vattendahl. Everyone called her Marge. She was young, bright, and warm, with the kind of confidence that did not need to be loud. She was an art teacher. She had a smile Bong remembered immediately. She did not seem overly impressed by medals, and perhaps that was part of what caught him. He had been praised, photographed, decorated, and questioned. Marge treated him like a person. For a man who had spent months living with death in the air, that may have mattered more than anything. Their courtship moved quickly, because war did not give people the luxury of slow beginnings. They saw each other as much as they could. They wrote. They made promises in the only way young people could during a war, quickly, honestly, and under the shadow of separation. In early 1944, Bong returned to the Pacific. Officially, his role had changed. He was assigned as a gunnery training officer, not simply as another combat pilot chasing missions. The Army Air Forces understood that Bong was valuable not only because he could shoot down enemy aircraft, but because he could teach others how to survive. On paper, that was the job. In practice, Bong was still Bong. He found a P-38 and turned it into something personal. He painted the name Marge on the nose. He placed her photograph on the aircraft. The men around him noticed. Mechanics smiled. Pilots joked. The quiet pilot, who did not boast about himself, had put the woman he loved on the side of a warplane. It was romance, promise, and superstition all at once. In war, men gave names to machines because machines carried them through fear. Bong gave his machine the name of the person he wanted to return to. Then the aircraft was lost. In March 1944, Bong was not flying Marge. Another pilot, Lieutenant Thomas Malone, was flying the P-38 when engine trouble forced him to bail out over Papua New Guinea. Malone survived. The aircraft disappeared into the jungle. For decades, the wreckage remained missing. The story of Marge became part of the larger legend of Bong. The girlfriend's name, the photograph on the nose, the aircraft swallowed by New Guinea. Then, in 2024, after 80 years, searchers located and identified the wreckage of the famous P-38. But in 1944, Bong had none of that closure. He only knew the aircraft was gone. So he did what he had always done. He got another P-38. He carried Marge's name forward. He went back into the war. By April 1944, his total was approaching the most famous American aerial record of all. Eddie Rickenbacker, the great American ace of World War I, had scored 26 victories over France for a generation. That number had stood as the summit of American fighter achievement. Rickenbacker was not merely a pilot by then. He was a national figure, a symbol from another war, another age of aviation. On April 12, 1944, Richard Bong tied that record. Then he broke it. His 27th victory made him the leading American ace. The news moved quickly. Newspapers loved the story. A modest farm boy from Wisconsin had surpassed the legendary Rickenbacker. The public wanted to know him. The military wanted to celebrate him. The country needed heroes, and Bong fit the role almost too well because he seemed so uncomfortable inside it. But to General Kenny, the record meant danger. Every additional mission now carried more than the risk of one pilot. Bong had become a symbol. If he died, the loss would be felt beyond his squadron. He was too valuable to keep throwing into the sky simply because he was willing to go. So Kenny promoted him to major and ordered him back to the United States. This was not a request. Bong went home. For a while, he served as a gunnery instructor. He was closer to Marge. He was out of the worst of the fighting. He had every reason to stay. Any sensible man might have accepted it as the end of his combat career. He had already done enough, more than enough. He had survived what killed other men. He had broken the record. He had nothing left to prove. But Bong asked to return. In September 1944, he requested assignment back to the 5th Air Force as a gunnery training officer. The language mattered. He was not officially going back as a combat pilot. He was going back to teach, to demonstrate, to help younger pilots learn what he had learned. But once he was back in the Pacific, the boundary between instruction and combat became very thin. Between October and November 1944, Bong flew voluntary combat missions over areas including Borneo and the Philippines. He took part in operations around Balikpapan and Leyte. He continued to fly, to demonstrate, and to fight. During this period, he added 8 more victories to his total. By the end, Richard Bong had 40 confirmed aerial victories. 40. No American pilot in World War II scored more. On December 12, 1944, at Tacloban in the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur presented Bong with the Medal of Honor. MacArthur, a man who understood ceremony and symbolism, stood before the young major and honored him as one of the bravest of the brave. There is a photograph from that day. MacArthur looks formal, severe, historic. Bong looks thin, young, and slightly embarrassed. The Medal of Honor rests on him like something too heavy for a man who never chased attention. He had done extraordinary things, but he still seemed like someone who would rather be back near an aircraft than standing in the center of a ceremony. He was 24 years old. He had flown roughly 200 combat missions and hundreds of combat hours. He had fought from New Guinea to the Philippines. He had survived weather, disease, enemy fighters, mechanical failure, and the terrifying closeness of his own tactics. America called him the Ace of Aces. Kenny finally grounded him for good. This time, there would be no return to combat. Bong came home. He arrived in the United States near the end of 1944, no longer simply a pilot, but a national hero. Reporters wanted interviews. Officials wanted appearances. The military wanted to use his story. The public wanted to hear from the quiet young man who had shot down more enemy aircraft than any other American. But Bong wanted Marge. On February 10, 1945, Richard Bong and Marjorie Vattendahl were married at Concordia Lutheran Church in Superior, Wisconsin. She wore white. He wore his uniform. In photographs from the day, he finally looks free of the Pacific's shadow for a moment. Not entirely. Men did not come back from that war unchanged. But on the church steps beside Marge, he looks young again. 24. Alive. Home. For the first time in years, the future seemed like something he might actually be allowed to have. They moved to California, where Bong became a test pilot for Lockheed. The work was dangerous, but it was not combat. At least not in the same way. He was no longer chasing Japanese aircraft through tropical skies. He was helping test the future of aviation. That future was the P-80 Shooting Star, a jet, no propeller, a new kind of engine, a new kind of speed, a new kind of danger. The P-80 represented the next age of air warfare. Men who had learned to fight with piston engines were now stepping into aircraft that behaved differently, accelerated differently, failed differently. The rules were changing again. Bong understood machines, but he was careful with unfamiliar ones. A good pilot did not assume mastery too soon. He learned, he listened. He respected what the aircraft could do and what it might do without warning. On August 6, 1945, at Lockheed Air Terminal in Burbank, California, Richard Bong prepared for an acceptance flight in a P-80 Shooting Star. Across the Pacific on that same day, the B-29 Enola Gay dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The war was entering its final chapter, though the world did not fully understand that yet. At Burbank, Bong climbed into the P-80. He went through the procedures, he took off. Shortly after takeoff, something went wrong with the aircraft's fuel system. The jet lost power at low altitude. Witnesses saw trouble almost immediately. The aircraft was only a few hundred feet above the ground. Bong tried to escape the dying jet, but altitude is time, and he did not have enough of either. His parachute began to deploy. It did not open fully. He struck the ground in North Hollywood. The aircraft crashed nearby. No one else was killed. Richard Ira Bong was dead at 24. The news of his death moved through the country. but it was overshadowed by Hiroshima. One of America's greatest pilots had died on the same day the world learned that a single bomb could destroy a city. The front pages belonged to the atomic age. Bong's death, shocking as it was, had stood beside a headline too enormous for anything else to compete with. The war he had survived was not officially over yet. Japan would announce surrender later in August. The formal surrender would come in September. But Bong did not live to see it. He had survived the skies of New Guinea, the fights over Buna, Lae, Borneo, and Leyte. He had survived the Zeros he was warned never to dogfight. He had survived close-range attacks that left his aircraft full of holes. He had survived long missions, bad weather, disease-ridden bases, and the kind of luck no man should be asked to spend twice. Then he died testing a jet in California. His body was brought home to Wisconsin. He was buried in Poplar Cemetery, near the place where he had grown up watching airplanes cross the northern sky. Marge was widowed at 22. She had known him for only a short time, but war compresses life. What might take years in peace can happen in weeks when every goodbye might be final. She carried his memory for nearly 6 decades. Airports, roads, bridges, veteran centers, and memorials would later carry Bong's name. People would speak of him as America's highest-scoring ace, the farm boy who became a legend, the quiet pilot who surpassed Rickenbacker and stood at the top of American fighter history. But the simplest image may be the most honest one. Dick Bong, standing beside a P-38 in New Guinea, flight suit stained, hands in his pockets, face thin from heat and exhaustion. The aircraft app beside him, no grand gesture, no heroic pose. Just a young man who looks as if he has been asked to stand still for a photograph when he would rather be anywhere else. Reporters always wanted a secret. They wanted him to explain how he did it. How did a shy farm boy become the deadliest American ace of the war? How did a man who did not boast, who did not call himself a great shot, who did not seem hungry for fame, become the pilot with 40 confirmed victories? Bong gave them simple answers. He said he was lucky. He said enemy aircraft got in his way. He said he fired plenty of lead, and eventually some of it hit. People heard humility. They were right. But they were also missing the truth hidden inside it. Richard Bong knew himself. He did not pretend to be a perfect marksman. He did not build his survival on fantasy. He understood that if he fired too early, he might miss. And in air combat, a miss was not harmless. A miss gave the enemy time. A miss wasted ammunition. A miss could turn hunter into prey. So Bong changed the problem. He took away the distance. At close range, the P-38's guns were devastating. At close range, the target filled the sight. At close range, even a pilot who doubted his own gunnery could make the shot count. But close range was also where death lived. The enemy could see him. The enemy could fire back. The enemy could turn into him. A fraction of a second mattered. A few yards mattered. A single mistake could mean collision, fire, or wreckage scattered across jungle or sea. That was the terrible beauty of Bong's method. It was simple enough for anyone to understand, and dangerous enough that almost no one wanted to copy it. He did not defeat the Zero by becoming a Zero pilot. He did not outturn what was built to turn. He did not ignore doctrine because he thought doctrine was useless. He understood the rule, then found the one place where his aircraft, his nerve, and his weakness as a shooter could meet. He closed in. He waited. He fired when missing became almost impossible. That was not recklessness, though it looked like it. It was calculation pushed to the edge of fear. It was a farm boy's understanding of machinery applied to aerial combat. He knew the P-38 could take punishment that lighter aircraft could not. He knew its nose guns gave him concentrated fire. He knew speed could carry him through the attack if he timed it properly. He knew the machine, and because he knew it, he trusted it in places where other men would have pulled away. But none of that meant he was safe. The bullet holes in his aircraft proved that. The damaged tails, punctured tanks, shredded control surfaces, and emergency landings proved that. The fact that he came home did not mean the danger was imaginary. It meant the margin had held one more time. There is a strange loneliness in that kind of courage. It is not the courage of speeches. It is not the courage of crowds. It is the courage of a single pilot in a cockpit closing distance, while instinct screams to fire now, break now, climb now, live now. Bong held steady, again and again, over Buna, over Huon Gulf, over Markham Valley, over Leh, over the islands and coastlines and jungle corridors of a theater that punished everyone who underestimated it. The Pacific Air War was not clean. It was not graceful. It was fought by exhausted men flying from miserable bases into weather that could kill them before combat began. It was fought by mechanics who patched bullet holes at night so the same aircraft could fly again in the morning. It was fought by pilots who learned to count fuel, clouds, mountains, and luck with equal seriousness. Bong became its most famous American fighter pilot, but he never seemed to belong to fame. He belonged to the cockpit, to the machine, to the narrow space between fear and action. And he belonged, in the end, to Marge. That may be why the story stays with people. Not only because he shot down 40 enemy aircraft, not only because he surpassed Rickenbacker, not only because MacArthur placed the Medal of Honor on his chest, but because he was so young, because he came from an ordinary place, because he fell in love in the middle of a war that had no patience for love, because he came home, married the girl, and seemed finally to have escaped the thing that had been chasing him through the sky. Then the future killed him. Not a Zero, not a Japanese ace, not flak over a hostile airfield, a jet, a new machine in a new age, failing at low altitude on a California morning while the world's attention turned toward Hiroshima. There is something almost unbearable in the timing. The greatest American ace of the war died on the day the world learned that war itself had changed forever. The piston engine age that had made him famous was ending. The atomic age was beginning. Jet fighters would soon rule the sky. The kind of combat Bong had mastered, close personal, gun-to-gun, pilot-to-pilot, would begin to fade into history. He died at the seam between two worlds. Behind him was the war of P-38s, Zeros, jungle strips, and nose-mounted guns. Ahead of him was the world of jets, missiles, nuclear weapons, and speeds that would make the old fights seem almost intimate. Richard Bong belonged to the old sky. The sky where a pilot could still close the distance until he saw the enemy aircraft fill his sight. The sky where nerve, timing, and machinery met in a single burst of gunfire. The sky where a farm boy from Wisconsin could become the deadliest American ace by doing the simplest and most dangerous thing, getting closer. That was the move no one expected. Not because no one understood it. Everyone understood it. That was the problem. Everyone understood how dangerous it was. Everyone understood that closing the distance gave the enemy a chance to kill you too. Everyone understood that at those ranges, one mistake could erase both aircraft. Everyone understood that no manual could promise survival there. Bong did it anyway. Not once. Not as a stunt. Not as a desperate act on a single day. He did it again and again until it became his signature, until his name became inseparable from the P-38 Lightning, until the quiet boy from Poplar became America's ace of aces. He did not need to look fearless. He only needed to act when fear told him to stop. He did not need to be the best shot. He only needed to know how to make the shot possible. He did not need to be larger than life. He only needed to come home one more time. And for 200 combat missions, he did. Until the war let him go. Until the future called him up. Until a jet climbed into the California sky and failed too low for even Richard Bong to save himself. Today, his name remains on memorials, roads, bridges, museums, and airports. But names carved into stone can sometimes make men seem less human, not more. They turn young faces into symbols. They turn fear into legend. They make the ending feel inevitable, as if the man always belonged to history. Dick Bong did not belong to history when he was alive. He belonged to Wisconsin fields, to cold mornings and farm machinery, to training fields in California and Arizona, to muddy airstrips in New Guinea, to the P-38 Lightning, to the woman whose name he painted on his aircraft, to the narrow, terrifying space between opening fire too soon and waiting too long. That was where he lived during the war. In that space, in that final stretch of air between distance and certainty. Closer, closer, then fire, and the sky changed. A farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, became the highest-scoring American ace of World War II, not because he chased legend, but because he understood one brutal truth better than anyone around him. Sometimes the simplest move is the hardest. Sometimes the thing that saves you is the thing everyone else is afraid to do. Sometimes courage is not a speech, not a medal, not a photograph, not a headline. Sometimes courage is holding your fire while the enemy grows larger in the gun sight. Sometimes it is trusting the machine beneath you. Sometimes it is flying straight into the narrow place where skill ends, luck begins, and fear has no more room to speak. Richard Ira Bong flew into that place again and again. He came home from the Pacific. He married Marge. He died before the peace arrived. And somewhere in the memory of that war, above jungle, sea, cloud, and steel gray sky, a P-38 Lightning is still closing the distance. Engine screaming, nose steady, pilot silent, closer than the manual advised, closer than the enemy expected, closer than most men could bear, and then at last close enough.